Today I am bringing you my May reading wrap-up. We are going to be talking about the 7 books that I read last month. 2 of those I technically finished the first week of June, but I'm going to count them anyway because I read most of them in May and this would be a pretty short wrap-up if I didn't talk about them. Also, I don't want to wait a month before talking about those books because I actually really enjoyed them. Otherwise, this wrap-up would be kind of mid because a lot of the books that I read last month I was given like 3 to 4 stars, and 4 stars isn't bad, but they were like 3.5s. A lot of these were sequels though, and I have been trying to work through my series TBR this year, so that is a positive. I am going to go in order of my least favourite to my favourite, but none of these were below 3 stars. So even this first book that I'm going to tell you about, I gave 3 stars. Didn't hate it, I thought it was just okay. First up, we have Cleopatra by Sarah L. Arifi. This is a historical fiction, slightly speculative novel. It's not fantasy. Sarah L. Arifi has previously written fantasy, and this I would say is more historical fiction. As you can probably guess from the title, it's a reimagining of Cleopatra's life from when she first became Pharaoh of Egypt. It's written as if Cleopatra is addressing you, the reader, specifically as if she is talking directly to the historians who have incorrectly documented her life. She breaks the fourth wall every so often and says, as you know, things didn't work out that way. And I think it was that element that I really struggled with. I don't typically like that kind of writing where characters break the fourth wall because it takes me out of the story and makes me very aware that I'm reading a book. I like second person narration, but this is more first person directive. It is very character focused. It's very focused on the various relationships that she has with, for example, she has a handmaiden who she's very close to. She has brothers and sisters, and there's very complicated family dynamics in this. She also has 2 romantic relationships. If you know anything about Cleopatra, you might already know some of this. I didn't know that much about her. Was interesting learning about her life, or at least this reimagining of her life. There's also a lot to do with faith and religion because people believe that the royal family are blessed by the gods and they have magical abilities as a result of this. If things are going wrong, then they believe it's because they've fallen out of favour with the gods. And I liked how that element was woven into the story. I thought that was done in a really clever way. The ending also caught me off guard. It wasn't what I was expecting. My main complaint was that it felt too short, and every so often I felt like we were finally going to get some emotional depth, and it just didn't quite go to the lengths that I wanted it to. I wanted this to be even slower, and some people are going to read this and think, what, this is already quite slow? I wanted it to be even slower in order for me to feel that emotional investment. So yeah, I gave this a 3 stars. It was probably closer to a 3.5. I didn't think it was bad, and I'm glad that I read it. I really want to love Sarah L. Arifi's books because I've seen her at various author events in the last few years, and she's so funny. She's so much fun, but I've yet to find a book from her that I've truly loved. I do still have The Final Strife on my TBR, and I think that's going to be my final chance with her writing before I just accept that she's not maybe for me. Next up, we have Alchemised by Senlin Yu. This is the Fairy Loot edition that I received when I was subscribed to their adult box last year. I'm not going to hold this up because it is extremely heavy. It's over 900 pages, and one of my main complaints with the book is that I don't think it needed to be that long. This, if you don't know, was a very hyped release last year because it is based on a very popular Harry Potter fan fiction. I haven't read the fan fiction and I don't plan on reading it. I've actually never read fan fiction. I don't have anything against it. I've just never really felt like drawn to it. I'm not actually sure if I would have read Alchemised if I hadn't received it through the Fairy Loot box because first of all, it's very long. And I think a few years ago, I was interested in reading anything that was super hyped, anything that had any amount of attention or was extremely popular. I wanted to read it. However, nowadays, like the last few years, I think I've gotten better at identifying my taste versus what is popular. And with Alchemised, I knew that it was extremely dark, specifically concerning the romance. There's been a lot of discussion around whether this book is romantasy or fantasy with romance, and I can see both sides of the argument. What I would say to set expectations is that this is very centered on a romance that it's not romanticized, and so that's why I'm hesitant to call it a romance. It's a relationship, and if you have no interest in reading about a relationship that is at the center of the story, then this is not going to be for you. So this is set in a world where people can be born with something called resonance, and my understanding, because it was never properly explained in the book, but my interpretation is that resonance basically means magic, and if you're born with resonance, most people have resonance for alchemy, so they can control or manipulate different metals. There's other types of magic as well, but that is like the main one, and most people who are born with resonance are born in this country of Palladia. The main character, Helena, came as an immigrant to this country in order to study at this famous alchemy institute. However, several years later, this war broke out and she ended up becoming a healer on this one side of the war, because at that point she learned that she had something called vivimancy, and vivimancy is the ability to manipulate the human body. So it can be used for healing, but it can also be used for necromancy. And the reason this war has broken out is because a group of necromancers have risen to power to try and overthrow the government. This all happens before the start of the book. The book opens with Helena waking up after being kept in a state of stasis for over a year, and she has lost her memory, or most of her memories from the last few years. She doesn't remember the end of the war, however she learns that her side lost and she is now a prisoner of war. She is sent to this powerful necromancer in order for him to break into her mind and see if she's hiding anything useful, because she has this amnesia. So that is the basic premise of the story. What I really appreciated is how this gave a different angle on war that you don't often see in fiction. As someone who used to work in a hospital, this was like a long time ago, I worked as a healthcare assistant on a surgical ward. When you work within the care profession, it's a very emotionally intense role, and I think that really came across, and I think that was one of the book's main strengths. The world and the magic system had a lot of potential, especially the necromancy and vivimancy aspect. However, I think it was unnecessarily complicated. I was so frustrated reading this because there were all of these little info dumps, but it never seemed to explain the magic in a clear and concise way, and it was just the most frustrating thing. Like, for example, with resonance, I kept thinking, okay, is this just the ability to use alchemy? Does everyone with resonance become an alchemist, and then some of them have more specialist roles? Can you be a vivimancer without being an alchemist? I don't think so, but it was never properly explained. I don't even know if it was intentional, because sometimes authors do that. They deliberately leave things for the reader to interpret or to piece the pieces together. I think a lot of it could have been stripped back and it could have been simplified, and it would have been much easier to follow. The central relationship also ended up being too dark for me, which I was a bit apprehensive about. Like, I had a feeling that that was going to be the case. This is a relationship about two very broken people who have seen and done unimaginably horrific things. This is a time of war, and I don't think the author was trying to say that certain things should be forgiven. I think it was a very traumatic situation for the characters to deal with, and I think the book was showing how these characters chose to process this situation, not that everyone should make the same choices that they do. It is very bleak, which is understandable, but I do think it was too long. I don't think this needed to be 1,000 pages, as I've already said. I think it could have been 700 pages, and I think cutting out certain parts would have made it feel less repetitive, and I think it would have made it more gripping, because there were certain parts of this that felt like a slog. As for this being based on a Harry Potter fanfiction, the only reason I knew is because I saw people talking about it online. I'm very confused why some people seem to be talking about this book as if it's a Harry Potter retelling, and that the publisher are marketing it like that, when that's not the case. And obviously I'm only speaking from my experience of living in the UK. I haven't seen anything from Fairy Loot or Waterstones or any major UK bookshop that's even connecting this to Harry Potter. And if you go on Goodreads, there are so many people saying that they had no idea. And I don't think it's difficult to go into this seeing it as something completely separate. Obviously, if someone chooses not to read a book for whatever reason, you don't need a reason to not want to read a book. If you're aware of its origins, then you can see some of the inspirations, but I don't think it's obvious when those inspirations could have just as easily come from other fantasy books or series out there that also have plots revolving around two sides of a war, because because that is essentially what this story is about. It's a story about war. Next up we have Dissection of a Murder by Jo Murray. This is a legal thriller that follows a woman called Layla who is a barrister. It's set in the UK in the northeast of England, and Layla has been given her first murder trial to defend, which is a pretty big deal. It's a very high profile case. The guy in question has been accused of murdering a judge. However, Layla's husband is the opposing counsel because he is also a barrister, but he's a little bit older and he has a lot more experience. So the first thing that I needed to check going into this book is how feasible is this? If this were to happen, would it actually happen? Because it seems like a conflict of interest to me. I googled, and according to Google, it would be fine because barristers are seen as independent, and as long as the person on trial is okay with it, then it's fine. So I got that out of the way. I listened to the audiobook for this. It's narrated by Joanne Froggatt, who was in Downton Abbey, and I think she did a fantastic job of bringing the story to life. I was hooked. The first, let's say 75%, I loved, and I was thinking, okay, this could be one of my new favourite legal thrillers, and unfortunately I hated the direction that it went in, and obviously I can't talk about it, but it's something that I know people are either gonna love or hate, and I think that's why I will still recommend this, because I think it's better to go into a book knowing that you're gonna have strong feelings on the ending than to go into it with, you know, people saying, oh yeah, it's just okay. I was listening to this while I was out for a walk, and I got to a certain part where I stopped and I rolled my eyes because I thought, seriously, is this what we're doing? Yeah, it wasn't for me, and it's a shame because I did think I was going to love this one. But if Jo Murray publishes any of the books, then I will read them because I thought this had so much potential. I think it's very difficult to find a thriller author who can pull off a twist that is foreshadowed but that isn't obvious, and I do think that Jo Murray achieved that with this. I felt like there were many different directions that this could have gone in, and it wasn't, in my opinion, predictable. I just didn't like it. Witness 8 by Steve Kavanagh is another legal thriller that I read in May. This is the 8th book in the Eddie Flynn series, which follows a lawyer called Eddie Flynn, surprisingly, and each book is a different case that he's working on because he is a New York defense attorney. In this book, he is representing a guy who lives in a wealthy neighborhood who has been accused of murdering his neighbor, and Eddie Flynn's whole ethos is that he will only represent people that he believes are innocent, and so he and his team are trying to pull together evidence to prove that this guy didn't do it. This book in particular has a lot of POVs, more than is typically in this series, and it is gripping and twisty like the other books, but I didn't think it was the strongest. I thought it was just okay. You have this character who witnesses the murder, and they have their own agenda that is kind of running alongside the story. To be honest, it's been a month since I read this, and I have already forgotten most of how I felt about it. I gave it 3.5 stars because I enjoyed it in the moment, and I'm going to continue this series, but I don't think this is one that's going to stick with me. I think the 10th book comes out soon, so I only have one more book to read and then I'm pretty much up to date, apart from the first 3 books that I still haven't read. Everyone in This Bank is a Thief by Benjamin Stevenson is another sequel that I read in May. This is the 4th book in the Ernest Cunningham series. Technically it's the 3rd novel. There is a Christmas novella which I haven't read. I meant to read it last year and forgot, and I didn't want to read it this month when it was boiling hot outside because that's just not the vibe, even though technically it's set in Australia, so it's the opposite seasons to what we have in the UK. Having now read this book, I don't think I would have benefited from having read that novella. If there was any connection, then I didn't pick up on it. But in this, we are following Ernest Cunningham, who gets caught up in a hostage situation at a bank, and as is in the title, everyone in this bank is a thief. This was a fun time. All of the books in this series are a fun time. They are really fun mysteries that are very self-aware. This also breaks the fourth wall, but it does so in a way that doesn't bother me. It's written as if Ernest is narrating the story, and it's like he's written a book about his experience. I don't feel too aware that I'm reading a book because it's meant to be that way, and also I have been listening to this series on audio, and the audiobooks are really enjoyable and engaging. So I gave this one 4 stars. These final 2 books I spoke about in more detail in my most recent reading vlog, so I will leave that linked just in case you would like to check it out if you haven't seen it already. But the first book that I finished in that vlog was Body of Lies by Jo Callahan. This is the 4th and final book in the Cat and Lock series, which has become one of my favourite crime thriller series. I gave this final book 4.5 stars. I think the 3rd book is still my favourite, but this did everything that I wanted it to. It felt clever and well thought out, but it had these emotional beats that just made me feel really sad because it was so clear that this was the end of the series. And I actually went to an event with Jo Callahan last week where she talked about how much pressure she had to continue this series and to keep writing books in it, but she had a clear idea of the direction that she wanted to take it in, and that did come across to me. Like, I felt that and I really appreciated that. She also talked about how some people are put off from starting the series because they hear it's about AI, when actually it's a very human story and there's a lot of human emotions. The main character, Kat, before the start of the first book, her husband dies from cancer and she has a teenage son who is going off to uni, so she's processing a lot of, like I said, human emotions. When she returns to work, she's a detective and she's told that she's going to be paired up with an AI detective called Ada Locke. Each book technically is a standalone because it's a different case that they're working on, but I would recommend reading the series in order because I think you are going to get so much more out of the characters by doing it that way. Initially, Kat is very much against AI. She believes that police work should be done by humans because she trusts her gut instinct a lot and she doesn't think the AI is the answer. But I think what this series does really well is it shows both sides. It shows how AI can help the police. For example, Locke can analyse huge amounts of data within a few minutes that would take a human detective hours, if not days or weeks. At the same time though, Locke struggles to understand humour and sarcasm. He is not very tactful when it comes to speaking to victims, and so I think it's very thought-provoking in that sense. The only reason I can see, or the main reason I can see some people not getting along with this series is it is quite direct, and I can see some people saying it's too on the nose. It's not very nuanced is what I'm trying to say, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing because it presents both sides of this argument and it shows so many different ways that AI can help or hinder the police. So I think it's still thought-provoking and I think you can still have a really good discussion about it, but it's not like the most nuanced, if you get what I mean. As I said, I do think you should read this series in order because this 4th book in particular is very character driven and it's very focused on the characters processing so much that has happened throughout the series, and I don't think you would like this 4th book if you haven't read the rest of the series. I think if you accidentally buy book 2 instead of book 1, then you could start with book 2 and I don't think you would miss too much, but I still think there's a lot that's set up in that first book that is still relevant in the later books in the series. The final book that I have to talk about is the Tapestry of Fate by Shannon Chakraborty. This is the sequel to The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi and I loved this. This was my favourite book that I read in May, although technically I finished it at the start of June, but it's my favourite book that I'm going to be talking about in this wrap up. I gave it 5 stars. I reread the first book a few weeks ago in order to prepare myself for this second book, and on reread I gave that first book 4 stars. The first time around it was a 4.5, but I think this second book was better. I do want to try and set expectations though. I think this has more of the slower and steadier pacing of the Daevabad trilogy, whereas the first Amina Al-Sarafi book, it is more action-packed and it's got a bit more movement. This second book is a bit more static and it is more about the intrigue and the slow unveiling of the magic in particular, and I loved it. I loved how this was very focused on a complicated friendship. There's a new character that's introduced that I thought was just fascinating. I love it when you're not sure how to feel about a character. You're not sure if you can trust them, you're not sure what their motivations are or even who who they really are, whether there's stuff from their past that is influencing things. And I think this book did that so well. The characters were so complex, they were so layered, and the ending, I loved the ending. I think you could comfortably read the first book as a standalone. It does set things up for this sequel, and I think this second book, again, it wraps up in a satisfying enough way while leaving things open for the sequel, and I am so intrigued by the direction the third book is going to go because of how it ends. I think Shannon Chakraborty is just so clever. I can see the vision of this series, and yeah, I love it. I've just realised I've not really told you what it's about, but we're following Amina Al-Sarafi, who is a retired pirate, and in the first book she is dragged out of retirement. She is offered a lot of money for one last quest, and she has this found family of her crew on the ship, but she also has an actual family. She's a mother, she has a mother and a brother. Every time she goes away, they worry about her and it causes conflict, and I just think that the character work in this is just so good. That does bring us to the end of this wrap up, so thank you for watching. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments, what was the best book that you read in May, and have you read any of the books that I've talked about in this wrap up? Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, click subscribe if you would like to see more videos from me, but otherwise I will see you next time. Bye.